Hi guys, in this video we're going to be learning about variables and types. Variables are used to store data within the application, and the types indicate the kind of data that you store in that variable. So for example, you might store a whole number, you might store the name of something, something with a decimal value, something that is either true or false, and with each of these you'd use a different type. To explain this further, we're going to create a new class. So right click on the Java folder, New, Java class, and call it House. We now have the template for a house class. We can declare variables in a number of different ways, and the first way is as a class variable or an instance variable. So we're going to create a variable that's a part of the whole house class. The variable declaration itself consists of three parts: an access modifier, a type, and the variable name. So let's start by typing private, which is our access modifier indicating that it's only available within this class, string, address. So this will represent the address of the house. And here we have a string, which is our data type, and address, which is the name, and a semicolon to end the line. Now let's create a few other variables as part of the house class. Private, int, number of bedrooms. So this time we're using int because the number of bedrooms is a whole number. So int represents integer. In other words, a whole number. You can't have half a bedroom or anything like that. So we use a whole number for number of bedrooms. You can't have half a bedroom or anything like that. So we use int, which represents a whole number. The next one is private, Boolean, has garage. We're using Boolean here, so Boolean signifies that it can either be true or false. If we don't declare it with a value at the start, it will automatically set it to false. And the same for number of bedrooms. So if we don't give it a value, it'll be set to 0. And if we don't give address a value, it will be set to an empty string. In other words, just quotation marks with no content inside them. And finally, private, double, number of bathrooms. So in the United States, for example, you can have a decimal value for the number of bathrooms. So you can have 2.5 bathrooms or 2.5 baths, as they would say it. But as we did for number of bedrooms, we're going to use a double, which allows us to have a decimal value. Now that we've declared each of these variables, we need to initialize them with a value. And we can do that directly here, or we could do that with the constructor. So let's create a constructor, public house. One final point to note as well with these variables is that they are using Camelcase notation for the naming. So in other words, the first letter of the first word is lowercase, every subsequent word is an uppercase character for the first letter. Let's go back to the constructor. So address equals, and we can supply the address here, so I could supply it as something like 31 Main Street. But what we're going to do here is provide a parameter to the constructor. So string address. In other words, as we instantiate this house, we will provide it with an address. So if we were to instantiate 10 house classes, then they could all have different addresses. If we were to leave it as it currently is, then all of those 10 houses would have the same address, which of course you wouldn't want. So I'm going to change this with address, and I'm going to put this dot in front of it here. And this dot address represents the address up at the top here, the actual instance variable. Whereas this address represents the local variable here. And this is our second usage of a variable, so we can have it as a parameter to a method. Now let's initialize the rest of the variables. Let's start with the number of bedrooms. So what we're going to do here is firstly declare the number of bedrooms downstairs and the number of bedrooms upstairs and add them together and assign them to this variable here, which is the total number upstairs and downstairs in the house. And this will take us to our third use of a variable, which is as a local parameter. So int number of bedrooms downstairs equals 1. Int number of bedrooms upstairs equals 3. So we've declared two variables and we've initialized them with a value within the constructor. We'll now do number of bedrooms equals the number of bedrooms downstairs plus the number of bedrooms upstairs. That will assign 1 to the number of bedrooms downstairs, 3 to the number of bedrooms upstairs, and it will add them together. And because this is an assignment operator, it will assign it to the number of bedrooms here, which is this value. We're going to say that the house has a garage, so true. And we're going to say that the number of bathrooms equals 2.5. So we've declared and instantiated our variables, and we're using 3 different ways to declare variables. We have them as a class variable here, or an instance variable. We have them as part of a parameter here, and we also have them as a local variable here and here. So what we need to do now is create some getter methods to retrieve the data from this class. Public string get address, and you can see IntelliJ pops it up because it knows that we have an address here. I'll type string, and we've typed get, which means that we want to retrieve something of type string. Parentheses, curly brackets, return address. Public int get number of bedrooms, return number of bedrooms. Return has garage. And our last one, public double get number of bathrooms, return number of bathrooms. So we now have some getter methods that we can use in the application class. And what we're going to do here is instantiate the house class and print out each of its values. So house equals new house. And you'll notice here how we're declaring a house variable, and we're giving it a type of house. This type is slightly different. This is an object type, in a similar way that string is an object type. And these are primitive types. So object types start with a capital letter. Primitive types such as int, Boolean, double, char, float, all of these, they are primitive types. So back to our application class. And you can see now there's a red underline here because as part of our house constructor, it expects an address. Let's give it an address, 31 Main Street. And what I'm going to do now is type sout, which is our shorthand for system out print line, quotation marks, address, concatenator, and we'll talk more about this in a later video, house.get address. Sout, quotation marks, bedrooms, house.get number of bedrooms, baths, house.get number of bathrooms, has garage, house.has garage. Now let's run the application, and we should see that we print out each of the values in the console. So play, and you can see that we've printed out 31 Main Street, 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, and has garage true. Now let's go back to the house class, and we're going to do one other thing here. So let's create another method. Public void. So we're not going to return anything from this method, it's going to be a setter method. Set, and you can see IntelliJ pops up with some options based on the variables that we have up here. So set number of bathrooms. And inside the parentheses, we're going to do double new number of bathrooms. And we're going to say this dot number of bathrooms equals new number of bathrooms. So what is the point of this? Well, if we go back to our application, what we're going to do here is we have a value for bats, which is 2.5. What we're going to do is simply change that value to something else. So we're going to go from 2.5 bats to 3.5 bats within the same house object. So let's return to the house, and we have set number of bathrooms. That will take a new number of bathrooms as a parameter. When we call that method, it will pass it to here, and then because of our assignment operator, it passes it to the left-hand side, which is number of bathrooms here. And then we'll get the number of bathrooms as we did before, and we'll now see that it'll have a new value. Let's go house dot set new number of bathrooms, set number of bathrooms, and we're going to give it a value of 4.5. We're adding 2 extra bathrooms to this house. And then we'll do our printout statement so we can see the new value of the bathrooms, or bats. So bats, and I'll just put new bats there, house dot get number of bathrooms. Run the application, and you can see now that previously we had 2.5, we've set it now to 4.5, and when we retrieve it again with our getter method, it sets it to 4.5. Now let's return to our house class. So you can see that we have each of our 4 variables here. Because of the fact that we set the address, the number of bedrooms, and has garage within the constructor, we set them straight away as the object is created. We can give them a specific keyword, and that keyword is final. Just after the private keyword, I'm going to type final. Final and final. So the keyword final basically signifies that the variable will not change. We don't have any need for those variables to change. If it has an address, that address won't change, the number of bedrooms won't change, and has garage won't change in this particular context, because we set them on the constructor, and then at no point else in the application do we change them. However, the number of bathrooms is different, because yes, we do set that here as 2.5, but within the application it is allowed to be changed because we have our setter method, in other words, the mutator method for number of bathrooms. So that can change. Therefore, it isn't appropriate to give it a final keyword because final, as we said, represents a variable that does not change once it's been created. The final thing that we can talk about in this video is the use of the keyword static for variables. And that basically means that the variable belongs to a class. It has the same value for all objects that will access it. This makes it a class variable. A non-static variable, such as any of the ones here, means that the variable belongs to the object. In other words, it's an instance variable. So instance variable belongs to the object, class variable belongs to the class, and it will not change. Hence the term static. So we can try this out by making the address a static variable. So let's add static in front of the final. So static final string address. Now we can't leave it as it is because yes, we are setting the address as we create the object. But as we said, static means that it belongs to a class, and the constructor signifies that it belongs to an object. So we need to change this slightly. We're going to remove this line. We're going to remove this parameter. We're going to go back to our application, and we're going to remove 31 Main Street from here and go back to our house. So now we have an address that's a static variable, but we don't have a value for it yet. So we need to instantiate it straight away as we declare it. 31 Main Street. We now have a static variable for the address that's part of the house class rather than as part of the house object. And also to note here, because of the fact that it's static, it has a different naming convention. So instead of a lowercase address, we simply type address all uppercase. We can also remove the getter, so we don't need to get the address anymore. So we now have an address that we set as a static variable. Hopefully that makes sense, but we will go into more detail with this when we create some applications. That's everything that I'm going to go through in this video. Thank you very much for listening. I really hope you found it useful, and if you did, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe.